A boy sang at the Millionaire'S restaurant to earn money for his grandmother's surgery, but as soon as he touched the microphone, everyone was shocked. Before starting the video, say what time you are watching this video and where from. Lucas, a bright and compassionate 13-year-old, lived a modest life in Houston with his grandmother, Agnes. Agnes had raised him since infancy, filling the void left by his absent parents with endless love and care. Their tiny apartment, though modest, radiated warmth due to their close bond. Lucas had never known his parents. Agnes dodged his questions about them, offering vague reassurances. Though his heart ached for answers, Lucas trusted Agnes's judgment, cherishing their unique bond. He often helped her cook meals, played her favorite songs on his secondhand guitar, and dreamed of brighter days when he could support her. But as of late, their world had grown dark. Agnes's health had been declining rapidly, leaving her frail and bedridden. A visit to the doctor revealed devastating news. Without a costly surgery, Agnes's condition would soon turn fatal. Lucas's heart broke at the thought of losing the one person who was his entire world. Agnes's condition deteriorated swiftly, and the mounting medical bills became insurmountable. Despite her efforts to shield Lucas from the weight of their financial struggles, he noticed the constant stress in her eyes. As the days passed, hope began to dwindle. When their savings ran out, the landlord's threats escalated, forcing Child Protective Services to intervene. Reluctantly, Lucas was sent to an orphanage while Agnes was transferred to a charity-run hospice. The separation shattered him. From the lonely cot at the orphanage, Lucas clutched Agnes's worn scarf, the only memento he had of her. Determined not to let circumstances dictate his fate, Lucas began devising a plan. He couldn't allow Agnes's life to slip away. If no one else could help them, then he would find a way, even if it meant taking on responsibilities far beyond his years. Lucas had one talent that set him apart: his voice. Agnes had always said he sang like an angel, and it was during those difficult nights in the orphanage that Lucas decided to use his gift. If he could earn enough money, perhaps he could pay for Agnes's surgery. Under the cover of darkness, Lucas sneaked out of the orphanage and began performing on street corners, serenading passers-by with heartfelt ballads. His voice, though youthful, carried a depth of emotion that captivated everyone who stopped to listen. As weeks passed, Lucas realized that small crowds and pocket change wouldn't be enough. He needed to aim higher. Armed with a fierce resolve and a dream to save the woman who meant everything to him, Lucas set his sights on larger venues. He was willing to risk everything, even if it meant defying the odds and breaking the rules. One evening, Lucas overheard a conversation at a bustling street corner about a restaurant called Retro Flavor. Known for its vintage charm, Retro Flavor had gained a reputation as a hotspot for local artists and performers. The thought of performing there filled Lucas with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. A place like that could bring in more money than he'd ever make on the streets, but convincing anyone to let a scrawny teenager perform in a venue like that seemed impossible. Still, he couldn't let fear hold him back. Clutching his guitar, Lucas made his way to Retro Flavor the next night. The glowing neon sign bathed the street in warm colors, and the hum of laughter and music spilled out onto the sidewalk. Lucas lingered outside for what felt like hours, rehearsing the words he planned to say to the owner. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to step inside. The restaurant was a kaleidoscope of sights and sounds. Diners laughed over plates of gourmet food, and a performer on stage strummed a lively tune. Lucas scanned the room until his eyes landed on a stern-looking man in his 50s, Mason, the restaurant owner. Approaching Mason took every ounce of courage Lucas could muster. "Excuse me, sir," Lucas began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a singer. I was wondering if you'd let me perform here, just once. I promise I won't disappoint you." Mason raised an eyebrow, sizing up the boy in front of him. "Kid, this isn't a street corner. People come here expecting a show. How old are you, anyway?" 13, Lucas admitted, straightening his back. "But I can sing. Please give me a chance." Mason sighed, clearly skeptical. "All right, kid. You get one shot, one song. But if you mess this up, That's it. Lucas nodded, clutching his guitar tightly. As he walked toward the stage, his hands trembled. The crowd barely noticed him at first, their chatter drowning out his footsteps. But as Lucas prepared to sing, a hush fell over the room. Something about the boy on stage made people pause. Lucas adjusted the microphone stand, his fingers trembling as he strummed a few notes on his guitar. The weight of the room's silence pressed on him, but he forced himself to focus on one thing: Agnes. Closing his eyes, he drew a deep breath and began to sing. The opening lines of "Just the Two of Us" filled the restaurant. His voice, raw yet incredibly soulful, carried a depth of emotion that stunned the audience into stillness. Lucas poured every ounce of his longing and love for his grandmother into the song, his words resonating with a sincerity that seemed almost otherworldly. The room, bustling with activity moments ago, was now transfixed. Conversations halted, forks paused midair, and even Mason, who had been leaning against the bar, arms crossed, stood upright, his expression softening with disbelief. Lucas wasn't just singing. He was baring his soul, creating a connection so profound it felt tangible. As the final notes hung in the air, there was a heartbeat of silence, followed by thunderous applause. The audience erupted into cheers, some even rising from their seats to give him a standing ovation. Lucas's cheeks flushed as he stepped away from the microphone, his wide eyes scanning the room in disbelief. Mason approached him, his skepticism replaced by a look of quiet amazement. "Kid, I don't know where you've been hiding that voice, but that was incredible. How would you like to sing here every Friday night?" "Really?" Lucas asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'd love to." "Good," Mason replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "But don't think I'm doing you a favor. You earned that spot tonight." As Lucas descended from the stage, he was approached by several patrons who complimented his performance and handed him generous tips. His pockets were heavier that night than they'd ever been, but more importantly, his heart was lighter. For the first time in weeks, Lucas felt a flicker of hope. He had found a way to fight for Agnes. That night, as he returned to the orphanage, Lucas whispered to the stars, "Hang on, Grandma. I'm going to save you." The following weeks were a whirlwind for Lucas. Every Friday, he snuck out of the orphanage after lights out, his guitar strapped to his back. Retro Flavor became his sanctuary, a place where his voice not only earned him tips, but also gave him a sense of purpose. Yet, the secret weighed heavily on him. If the orphanage staff found out, he could be in serious trouble. One night, after his usual performance, Lucas quietly slipped back into the orphanage. As he crept toward his cot, a soft voice startled him. "You've been busy, haven't you?" Lucas froze, turning to see Miss Clara, the kind-hearted cook who often snuck extra food to the children. She stood in the dim light, arms crossed but with a knowing smile on her face. "Don't worry," Clara whispered, her expression softening. "I won't tell anyone." Lucas's shoulders sagged in relief. "Please, Miss Clara. I need to do this. My grandma, she's sick, and I need money for her surgery." Clara's eyes glistened with emotion as she listened to his story. She had always admired Lucas's resilience, but now she saw the depth of his love and determination. "You're a brave boy, Lucas," she said softly. "But you can't do this alone. Let me help." From that night on, Miss Clara became Lucas's silent ally. She covered for him when he snuck out and even helped him save his earnings in a small tin she kept hidden in the kitchen. Occasionally, she would sneak out herself to watch his performances, standing in the shadows of Retro Flavor and beaming with pride. Lucas also found support from the staff and patrons at the restaurant. Mason, though gruff, made sure Lucas got a decent meal after every performance. Some of the regulars began bringing small gifts, new strings for his guitar, warm gloves for the winter months. Though Lucas had started this journey alone, he was slowly building a network of people who believed in him. With every dollar he earned, Lucas grew closer to his goal. His heart swelled with hope, but he knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready for the fight. One Friday evening, Lucas took the stage at Retro Flavor as usual. The room, now packed with regulars who came specifically to hear him sing, buzzed with anticipation. Among the crowd sat a woman who had never been there before. Sophia Carter, a poised and polished businesswoman in her mid-30s, was visiting Houston for a corporate event and had decided to unwind at the restaurant. Sophia's life had always been carefully curated. Her career as a marketing executive left little room for spontaneity. Yet, as she sipped her wine, her gaze kept drifting to the boy adjusting the microphone. There was something oddly familiar about him. As Lucas began to sing, Sophia felt a wave of emotions crash over her. His voice, hauntingly beautiful, was eerily reminiscent of someone from her past. Memories she had buried long ago surfaced with startling clarity. Dylan, her first love, and the man who had vanished from her life 2 decades earlier. Sophia gripped the edge of the table, her heart pounding. The resemblance was uncanny, not just in Lucas's voice, but in his mannerisms, the way he tilted his head as he sang, the intensity in his expression. It was as though she were looking at a ghost from her past. The performance ended, and the room erupted in applause. But Sophia barely noticed. Her thoughts raced as she pieced together the fragments of her memories. Could this boy be connected to Dylan? Was it possible that he was? Her logical mind dismissed the idea as ridiculous, but the ache in her heart told her otherwise. She couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Lucas. As he descended the stage, collecting tips and exchanging shy smiles with the patrons, Sophia made a decision. She needed answers. She flagged down Mason, who had been bustling between tables. "That boy," she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Who is he? Where did he come from?" Mason shrugged. "Kid's a mystery. Just showed up one day, asking to sing. He's got talent though, doesn't he?" Sophia nodded, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't shake the feeling that her path and Lucas's had crossed for a reason. Sophia's usually composed demeanor began to unravel as she sat in the bustling retro flavor. The joyous atmosphere around her clashed with the storm brewing inside. Lucas's performance had stirred something deep within her, a mixture of nostalgia, longing, and sorrow that she hadn't felt in years. Determined to steady herself, Sophia rose from her seat, intending to leave. But as she neared the exit, Lucas's voice from an impromptu encore performance stopped her in her tracks. He was singing a song she hadn't heard in decades, a song Dylan used to hum during their quiet moments together. The melody hit her like a tidal wave. The room spun, and the edges of her vision blurred. She tried to grab onto the nearest table for support, but her legs buckled, and she collapsed to the floor. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Mason rushed over, shouting for someone to call for help. Lucas, who had been mid-song, froze as he noticed the commotion. The woman who had just fallen looked unfamiliar, yet something about her struck a chord deep within him. Without thinking, Lucas set down his guitar and pushed through the crowd to reach her. Sophia's pale face and trembling hands filled him with concern. "Is she okay?" he asked Mason, his voice shaking. Mason knelt beside Sophia, gently patting her cheek. "Miss, can you hear me?" Sophia's eyes fluttered open, her gaze locking onto Lucas. The boy's worried face hovered above her, and in that moment, she saw Dylan's likeness, so vividly it stole her breath away. "Who are you?" she whispered weakly, her voice barely audible over the murmurs of the crowd. Lucas hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm
Lucas," he said.
"Are you all right?" Sophia nodded faintly, but couldn't tear her eyes away from him. Tears welled up as she whispered, "You remind me of someone I lost." The words hung heavily in the air. Lucas, though puzzled, felt an inexplicable pull toward this stranger. He couldn't explain why, but he sensed that this moment would change everything. After the incident, Mason insisted Sophia rest in the back room of the restaurant until she felt well enough to leave. Despite her protests, she was overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions that she couldn't fully process. She needed time to think. As she sat alone, her thoughts raced. The boy, Lucas, was more than just a talented singer. There was something about him that tugged at her heartstrings, something eerily familiar. His voice, his presence, the way he carried himself, it all felt like a whisper from her past. Sophia reached for her purse and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through old photos, searching for the one person who had haunted her thoughts all night, Dylan. Her heart clenched as she found a faded picture of him from years ago, his youthful face radiating the same intensity she had seen in Lucas's eyes. The connection seemed impossible, yet undeniable. Could Lucas be Dylan's son? If so, why was he here, singing in a restaurant, instead of with his family? Questions swirled in her mind, refusing to let her rest. After regaining her composure, Sophia approached Mason at the bar. "I need to know more about Lucas," she said firmly. Mason raised an eyebrow, surprised by her intensity. "Kid's private. Doesn't share much. Why the sudden interest?" Sophia hesitated, debating how much to reveal. Finally, she said, "He reminds me of someone. Someone I cared about deeply. I need to understand why." Mason frowned but nodded. "All I know is that he's been singing here for a while. Comes in every Friday like clockwork. Whatever his story is, it's locked up tight." Sophia left the restaurant that night with a newfound resolve. She couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward Lucas. Something about his existence was intertwined with her past, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Lucas lay awake in his cot at the orphanage, haunted by the look in Sophia's eyes. Her words echoed in his mind. "You remind me of someone I lost." He had always wondered about his parents, about who he really was. For the first time, he felt that the answers might be closer than he thought. The next morning, Lucas made his way to the charity hospice where his grandmother, Agnes, was staying. Her room was small but filled with the comforting scent of lavender, a smell that always reminded Lucas of home. Agnes, frail but cheerful as always, lit up when she saw him. "Lucas," she said softly, holding out a hand. "How's my little star? Did you sing last night?" Lucas smiled, sitting beside her and taking her hand. "I did, Grandma, and it went well. But something strange happened." Agnes's face grew concerned. "What do you mean?" Lucas hesitated. He didn't want to upset her, but he needed answers. "There was a woman there," she said. "I reminded her of someone she lost. And I don't know, Grandma. She looked at me like she knew me." Agnes's hand tightened slightly around his. Her eyes flickered with something Lucas couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Sadness? "Lucas," she began carefully, "there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Lucas leaned in, his heart pounding. "What is it?" Agnes took a deep breath. "Your father's name was Dylan. He was a kind man with a voice just like yours. But life was complicated for him. There were people who wanted to hurt him, and he thought the only way to protect you was to leave." "Leave?" Lucas's voice cracked. "Why didn't he take me with him?" Agnes's eyes filled with tears. "Because he loved you too much to risk your safety. He thought you'd be better off with me. He promised he'd come back once it was safe, but he never did. I don't know what happened to him, Lucas. I don't even know if he's still alive." Lucas sat back, stunned. His father wasn't just a mystery. He was a man who had chosen to disappear. But why? And could that woman at the restaurant be connected to him? "I need to know the truth, Grandma," Lucas said quietly. "I need to find him." Agnes nodded, her frail fingers brushing his cheek. "Then you go, my love. Follow your heart." Determined to find the truth about his father, Lucas decided to act. Armed with the little information Agnes had shared, he began piecing together clues. His first step was confiding in Sophia, who had made a lasting impression on him the night before. Though hesitant at first, Lucas felt that she held a key to unlocking his past. Sophia agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe, still haunted by the connection she felt to him. Over steaming cups of tea, Lucas shared everything Agnes had told him about Dylan. Sophia listened intently, her heart racing with every detail. When Lucas mentioned Dylan's decision to leave for safety, Sophia's breath caught. "Dylan always spoke about people who were after him," she said softly. "He never told me who they were, but I remember he was always looking over his shoulder. That's why he disappeared." Lucas leaned forward, hope flickering in his chest. "You knew him? What was he like?" Sophia's voice grew wistful. He was kind, gentle, and incredibly talented. His voice could silence a room. But he had a heavy heart, always carrying more than he let on. When he left, it broke me. The weight of her words hung between them, but Sophia's determination to help Lucas pushed her forward. "I'll use every resource I have to find him," she promised. "We'll start with the last place he was seen." Sophia tapped into her vast network, hiring a private investigator and scouring records. Days turned into weeks, but finally, a lead emerged. Dylan had been spotted years ago in a small town near Houston. He was reportedly living under a different name, working odd jobs, and keeping a low profile. Lucas's heart raced as they set out on the journey together. The dusty roads leading to the town felt like a bridge between the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. With each mile, his anticipation grew. When they reached the town, they began asking around. A gas station attendant confirmed that a man fitting Dylan's description lived on the outskirts, in a secluded cabin. Lucas's hands trembled as he prepared to meet the man who had shaped his life without ever being there. The cabin came into view, nestled among towering pines on the outskirts of town. It was small and weathered, with a sagging roof and a rickety porch. Lucas's heart pounded as he and Sophia approached, the sound of their footsteps crunching on the gravel road. "Are you sure about this?" Sophia asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. She could feel his anxiety radiating off him. Lucas nodded, clutching his guitar like a lifeline. "I have to know." As they reached the porch, Lucas hesitated for a moment before raising a trembling hand to knock on the door. The sound echoed in the stillness. A long silence followed, and just as Lucas was about to lose hope, the door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked older than his years. His eyes, though weary, held a glimmer of recognition as they fell on Lucas. His breath caught. "Lucas," the man whispered, his voice breaking. Lucas's world tilted. This man, his father, stood before him, real and alive, yet a stranger all the same. "Are you?" Lucas's voice faltered. "Are you Dylan's?" Dylan nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. "Yes." "And you're my son." The moment hung between them, heavy with emotion. Lucas felt a surge of anger, hurt, and longing all at once. "Why did you leave?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Why did you abandon me and Grandma? Do you know what we've been through?" Dylan stepped back, as if the weight of Lucas's words had struck him physically. "I thought I was protecting you," he said hoarsely. "There were people after me, dangerous people. I didn't want them to hurt you or your grandmother. But I failed you, Lucas. I failed both of you." Sophia watched from the edge of the porch, her heart aching for them both. Lucas's anger gave way to tears as years of pent-up emotions spilled out. "I needed you. I needed a father." Dylan fell to his knees, reaching out to him. "I'm so sorry, Lucas. I've thought about you every single day. If I could go back, I'd do everything differently." After a long pause, Lucas finally stepped forward. Though their bond was fractured, the faint hope of reconciliation flickered in his heart. The days following the reunion were an emotional whirlwind for Lucas and Dylan. They spent hours talking, filling the gaping void left by years of separation. But their conversations were not without tension. While Lucas longed for answers, his resentment toward Dylan for leaving still simmered beneath the surface. Dylan, for his part, tried to rebuild trust by being honest. He shared stories of his troubled past, of the debts he'd inherited, the threats from dangerous men, and the fear that drove him to flee. "Leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done," he confessed one evening as they sat by the cabin's crackling fireplace. "But I thought it was the only way to keep you safe." Lucas nodded but didn't reply. The explanations, though heartfelt, didn't erase the years of absence. He struggled to reconcile the image of the father he'd imagined with the flawed, remorseful man before him. Sophia, acting as a quiet mediator, encouraged them to find common ground. "Start small," she advised Dylan. "Show Lucas that you're here now, willing to be part of his life." Dylan took her advice to heart. He began attending Lucas's performances at Retro Flavor, sitting discreetly at the back of the room. Watching his son sing was both a joy and a bittersweet reminder of all the moments he had missed. Each note Lucas sang seemed to carry years of pain and longing, yet also a glimmer of hope. For Lucas, seeing Dylan in the audience stirred mixed emotions. Part of him felt validated by his father's presence, but another part remained guarded, unwilling to fully forgive. He channeled those feelings into his music, his songs growing richer and more emotional with each performance. As they spent more time together, the walls between them began to crack. Dylan helped Lucas practice his guitar, offering gentle guidance that reminded Lucas of Agnes's patience. Slowly, trust began to take root, not as a sudden reconciliation, but as a fragile, growing bond. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, Lucas allowed himself to hope that they could rebuild what had been lost. As Lucas continued to perform and save his earnings, the long-awaited day finally arrived. He had raised enough money for Agnes's surgery. The moment filled him with equal parts relief and apprehension. Though he had done everything in his power, the success of the operation was now in the hands of the doctors. Dylan insisted on accompanying Lucas to the hospital, despite the awkwardness still lingering between them. "She's the reason you're here," Dylan had said firmly. "I owe her everything." Sophia joined them as well, lending quiet support. Together, the trio sat in the sterile waiting room, the hum of fluorescent lights amplifying the tension. Lucas clutched Agnes's scarf tightly in his hands, praying silently. Dylan sat beside him, his hand resting on Lucas's shoulder, a small gesture that, though unspoken, brought Lucas comfort. After hours that felt like days, the surgeon finally emerged. His expression was calm but serious. "The surgery was successful," he announced. "Agnes is stable, but her recovery will take time. She's a fighter, though. You can see her briefly." Tears streamed down Lucas's face as he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling with gratitude. When Lucas entered Agnes's room, she looked frail but peaceful, her cheeks tinged with a healthy flush he hadn't seen in weeks. She smiled weakly as he approached. "My little star," she murmured, reaching for his hand. Lucas knelt beside her, tears pooling in his eyes. "We did it, Grandma. You're going to be okay." Agnes's gaze shifted to Dylan, who stood awkwardly at the foot of the bed. Recognition flickered in her eyes, and she beckoned him closer. "Dylan," she said softly. "You came back." Dylan lowered his head, ashamed. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." Agnes smiled faintly. "You're here now. That's what matters." The reunion, though understated, marked the beginning of a new chapter for their family. For the first time in years, they were together, not whole but healing. The journey had been arduous, but the promise of brighter days was finally within reach. As the weeks passed, Agnes began her slow but steady recovery. Lucas visited her daily, bringing his guitar to serenade her with songs he had written. The music seemed to lift her spirits, and she often told him how proud she was of his resilience and courage. Meanwhile, Dylan worked hard to repair his relationship with both Agnes and Lucas. Though their bond remained fragile, small moments of connection began to emerge. Dylan would accompany Lucas to Retro Flavor, offering quiet support from the back of the room. Occasionally, he even shared stories about his youth, his struggles, and his love for music, stories that revealed a side of him Lucas had never known. Sophia, too, became an integral part of their makeshift family. She acted as a maternal figure for Lucas, guiding him through decisions and offering a shoulder to lean on. Her connection to Dylan deepened as well, though it remained unspoken. Both understood that their focus was on Lucas and the family they were slowly rebuilding. One evening, after a particularly emotional performance, Lucas returned to the table where Dylan, Agnes, and Sophia were seated. The sight of them together, laughing and talking like old friends, filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. "Lucas," Dylan said, raising a glass of water and a mock toast, "I know I don't say this enough, but you're amazing. Your music, your determination, it's incredible. I'm proud of you." Agnes nodded, her smile lighting up her face. "We all are." Lucas, taken aback by the sudden praise, felt his eyes sting with tears. "Thanks, Dad," he said quietly, the word feeling both unfamiliar and right. In that moment, the fractures in their family didn't seem as daunting. They had found their way back to each other, and though there were still wounds to heal, they were moving forward together. Lucas realized that he wasn't just fighting for Agnes anymore. He was fighting for all of them, for the family they were becoming. The road ahead was uncertain, but with love, forgiveness, and perseverance, Lucas believed they could face anything together. Lucas's performances at Retro Flavor continued to draw larger crowds, and his reputation as a prodigious young talent began to spread. One evening, while Lucas sang a heartfelt original composition, a man in the audience watched with keen interest. Unbeknownst to Lucas, this was Elliot Hayes, a renowned music producer who had worked with some of the biggest names in the industry. After the show, Elliot approached Lucas as he packed up his guitar. "You've got something special, kid," Elliot said, handing him a business card. "If you're interested in recording your music, give me a call." Lucas stared at the card, his hands trembling with excitement and disbelief. "Me? A real album?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elliot chuckled. "Yes, you. Don't sell yourself short. You've got a gift, and the world deserves to hear it." Lucas ran back to the table where Dylan, Sophia, and Agnes were waiting. Waving the card in the air, he blurted out, "A producer wants to record my songs. Can you believe it?" Dylan's face broke into a proud smile, while Sophia clapped her hands together in delight. Agnes, still recovering, but as sharp as ever, grinned. "I told you, my little star. The world would see how bright you shine." The decision to record an album was not an easy one. Lucas worried about balancing his new opportunity with his responsibilities to his family. "What if it's too much? What if I'm not ready?" he confided to Dylan one night. Dylan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay to be scared. But you've worked hard for this, and you deserve to follow your dreams. We'll be here to support you." With his family's encouragement, Lucas took the leap. The recording process was challenging yet exhilarating, allowing him to pour his heart into every track. Elliot's mentorship pushed him to refine his talent, and by the end of the sessions, Lucas felt like a new person, stronger, more confident, and ready for the next chapter of his life. As the release date for his debut album approached, Lucas realized that this was more than just a career milestone. It was a testament to his journey, his sacrifices, and the family who had stood by him. As Lucas's album neared completion, the family found themselves reflecting on how far they had come. For Dylan, the journey was particularly bittersweet. He watched Lucas flourish with a mix of pride and guilt, knowing he had missed so many formative years. Determined to make amends, Dylan sought to repair their fragile bond. One evening, after a long day of recording, Dylan and Lucas sat on the porch of Dylan's cabin. The air was cool, and the stars sparkled above them like tiny diamonds. "Lucas," Dylan began hesitantly, "I know I can't change the past, but I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've become an incredible young man, and I'm lucky to even be a part of your life now." Lucas looked down at the guitar in his lap, tracing the worn wood with his fingers. "It's been hard," he admitted. "There were so many nights when I wondered why you left, why you didn't come back. But I think I'm starting to understand. You did what you thought was best, even if it hurt." Dylan's throat tightened as he nodded. "I did. But I was wrong to think I could protect you by staying away. I see that now. And I promise I'll never leave again." Lucas studied his father's face, searching for the sincerity in his words. Finally, he gave a small smile. "Good. Because I need you here. Not just for me, but for Grandma, too. We're stronger together." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Dylan became more actively involved in Lucas's music career, attending recording sessions and offering advice on stage presence and performance. His own experiences as a young musician lent him insights that Lucas found invaluable. Meanwhile, Sophia wrestled with her own feelings about Dylan. Seeing him so invested in Lucas's life reminded her of the man she had once loved, but she remained focused on her role as Lucas's mentor and ally. Though their relationship had changed, A mutual respect and friendship grew between them. As the past's wounds began to heal, the family felt united in their shared goal, supporting Lucas as he chased his dreams and forged a brighter future for them all. The day of Lucas's album launch finally arrived, marking the culmination of months of hard work and sacrifice. Retro Flavor hosted a celebratory event, with the restaurant packed to the brim with familiar faces. Patrons who had supported Lucas from his first performance sat shoulder to shoulder with new fans who had heard of the boy with the golden voice. Agnes, now much stronger, sat in a place of honor near the stage, her eyes glistening with pride. Dylan and Sophia flanked her, their own emotions evident as they watched Lucas prepare for his performance. This wasn't just another show, it was the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. Lucas stepped onto the stage, his guitar in hand. The room fell silent as he adjusted the microphone. "This song is for my family," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "For my grandmother, who taught me what love and resilience mean. For my dad, who's shown me that it's never too late to come back. And for everyone who believed in me, even when I doubted myself." He began to play, his fingers moving effortlessly across the strings. The song, an original piece titled Home Again, was a heartfelt ballad about loss, forgiveness, and the strength of family. His voice soared, carrying every listener on a journey through his struggles and triumphs. As the final notes faded, the room erupted into applause. Lucas smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. He looked out into the crowd and saw Agnes beaming, Dylan wiping his eyes, and Sophia clapping with all her might. In that moment, he felt whole. After the performance, the family gathered outside under the night sky. Lucas wrapped an arm around Agnes's shoulders.
"Thank you, Grandma."
"For everything. I wouldn't be here without you." Agnes squeezed his hand. "You've always been my little star, Lucas. And now, the world knows it too." For the first time in years, Lucas felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had been anything but easy, but it had brought him closer to the people who mattered most. Together, they faced the future with hope and love, ready to embrace whatever came next.